Bear with me, I promise this is relevant to the review. In 1975, Pepsi-Cola Company had a marketing campaign called the Pepsi Challenge. In this campaign, they took random people off the street and have them try a small amount of Coke and Pepsi in a blind taste test to see which one consumers chose the most. The results were fairly overwhelming, with the majority of users choosing Pepsi. This was surprising to most of them, as most people were buying Coke at the time. What Pepsi expected was that this would put them on top of the cola wars, but it didn't have this effect. In fact, any gains they made in market share were quickly reversed and Coke maintained their market superiority. But why did people not buy Pepsi after that point? Well, it all came down to how people drink soda. In most households, people drink 8 to 12 ounces of soda at a time. But in the taste test, they were drinking small quantities. You see, Pepsi was a smoother and sweeter beverage, and for that reason, in a taste test, they preferred Pepsi. But when an entire can of soda is consumed, Coke is still the preference. The initial taste of bullets per minute is likewise going to be sweet and smooth and will leave players with an enthusiastic love for this game. With longer exposure, however, some players will take issue with a lack of approachability and a number of design flaws that hold this game back from being a favorite. Bullets Per Minute is a roguelike, rhythm-based first-person shooter. In Bullets Per Minute, you live and die by the rhythm of the soundtrack. Your shots, your dodges, and your reloads all have to be spot on with the soundtrack that's playing in the game. Not only that, but the enemies also move by that same rhythm. Their shots and many of their dodges and movements also happen in accordance with that beat. With a mechanic like this, it's crucial that the soundtrack is not only good, but it has to be tolerable from one play to the next, and this game does not disappoint. Not only is each track catchy and will instantly invade your mind, but it is endless fun to be part of the song as you fire, reload, and dodge in every single level. I found that I was making up tunes as I went, and I would just shoot at empty air just to be part of this amazing soundtrack. Without absolute perfection though, this mechanic of tying your bullets and movements to the music simply won't work. Not only is the implementation of this very novel mechanic perfect, it is jaw-dropping in its execution. Those first couple hours of gunplay feel so good as you reload with the heavy metal beats blasting away insects and demons as you run through the dungeon. There is no other way to describe it than by saying it feels badass. But as far as badassery goes, this is the end of the story for Bullets Per Minute, and this is the beginning of the mediocrity. First, I feel obligated to address the criticism that was my first criticism, but also the one that I find most often on the internet, and that's the use of the color paletting in this game. The coloring is just far too saturated and far too monotoned within the game to feel alive at any point. Far too often, instead of feeling like a game that's coming out in 2020, I feel like I'm playing something on a Super Game Boy in the mid-90s. The developers have compensated for this to some extent. They allow you to desaturate the colors to your own liking, but this really only tones down the color. It doesn't replace it or add additional detail, which is what this game truly needed. For my preferred way to play, I found that desaturating the colors all the way down to 0 allowed a really awesome effect where the game was just in black and white, but about 10% of the assets were still colored. This created a really cool effect as it highlighted items as I played through the game. Regardless of my approach though, I felt like this game needed an entire redressing from head to toe regarding its color. I realized that may have been a lot more work, but that would have been what was necessary for this game to be the best version of itself. My second criticism, and by far my greatest criticism, is the balance of the game overall. This manifests in multiple ways as you play through the game. The first way that I noticed that the game was imbalanced was just in the first level. All of the enemies in the first level, save for the bats, are ground dwelling. None of them fire projectiles, and they all skitter towards you. Some of the larger ones do jump, but it's all pretty slow. The bats, however, dodge quickly, are a small target, and can shoot. Not only can they shoot, but your character in the beginning of the game is range limited. The bats are not range limited. This enemy ends up being so overpowered in comparison to the other enemies that I'd say that about 90% of your damage in the first level is going to come from bats. Now, this isn't a criticism in saying that the bats are too difficult. This is a criticism saying that there's too large of a gap between the enemies in the first level and their difficulties. Either all of the lower end enemies need to be scaled up in some way, or the bats need to be scaled down. This one issue may seem like I'm nitpicking the developers, but I'm not. This is actually a really good metaphor for the game overall. In a typical roguelike, the player relies on luck and skill to get through a game. You have to know the mechanics and the items and the enemies in and out, through and through, in order to finally beat the game. But you're also going to be relying on luck. From designer to designer, you're going to get different implementations of luck versus skill with a roguelike. I think, however, that 80-20 is probably a really good ratio, where you want 80% of their success to be based on skill and 20% based on luck. The problem in the implementation in bullets per minute is that there is too large of a gamut between when you are lucky and when you are unlucky, that skill is not able to make up for that difference. And what ends up happening is your ability to proceed through the game ends up being closer to 50-50. Now, by no means is that broken, but the player is definitely going to feel that and is definitely going to feel frustrated by that because there is too heavy of a reliance on luck and not as much of a reliance on skill. It's understandable in a roguelike to just get a bad roll and have a bad run, but the player shouldn't be waiting around for that perfect first level where you get all the items you're looking for. I experienced this disparity in both ways. In my first hour of playing the game, I had pretty good luck, and even though I didn't understand the mechanics very well, I was able to make it to the third and fourth levels pretty easily. Then, for the next almost 3 hours, I didn't get out of the second level. Each time I played, it seemed like I got less and less coins and less health potions and was never able to afford or find any items that were of benefit. I felt like I was getting better with the mechanics, but for some reason it ended up with worse outcomes, and I felt like that wasn't how the game was supposed to work. I wasn't supposed to get better and do worse. The following day, however, when I sat down at the computer again and gave it another go, I had the exact opposite happen. Run after run, I was given what felt like a divine intervention of good fortune. This culminated in a run that was so good that by the end of the third level, I was so powerful that I simply stopped fighting the bosses. As you enter the bosses' rooms, they do a little cameo where it shows their face. No boss in the game, save for the final boss of the game, lasted more than 5 seconds outside its cameo. My guns were too strong, my health was too high, and I simply steamrolled the game. So on both sides of the coin, this is not how the game is supposed to be balanced. I'm not supposed to have 2 hours of runs where it feels like I'm making no progress, and then a half an hour of runs where it feels like I am literally God. But the positive aspect here is that this is something that they can fix, and hopefully they watch this review and they listen to this criticism and they take action here. I'm thinking that more than likely, and I'm being a little presumptive in being a little prescriptive, Hopefully they can just tighten up the loot tables, make it so it's more likely that you get a smaller spectrum of stuff from level to level. That would make it so that it tones down the amount of luck that you're having and tones up the amount of skill that's required to go from level to level. It shouldn't be so hard, and it shouldn't be so easy. My third and final major criticism, and this is probably the most subjective of them, is that there is a lack of game design indicators and affordances in this game. What I mean when I say this is that this game doesn't show the player enough how to play the game. And I'm not talking about tutorials, because clearly this game was made with no hand-holding. They want you to just jump in and start to play. The problem with that is, if you're making that decision for your game, then you need to have a lot of indicators with how things work so the player can figure it out on their own. At this point, I've played for about 4 hours, and there are still some statues that when I drop keys or coins onto them, I simply don't know what they do. In fact, there was one big plate that happened right before the final boss, and I dropped 40 coins on it, and nothing happened. So for me, I look at that plate now, a plate that I'm probably not going to get to very often, and I'm going to just avoid that plate at all costs, because all it does is suck up my money. I'm sure it has some mechanic, but because it cost me so much to figure out that it didn't work, I won't use it again. Another similar mechanic were the challenge rooms. These rooms are indicated by the swords on the map. Now when you go into those, you can pull a lever and it gives you a number of enemies to fight, a little bit more difficult than your average room. With a challenge room, the name challenge makes the player think that there is a higher risk, so you think there's going to be a higher reward. When you clean out the room, you're given a normal chest, just like any other room in the game. That felt like a ripoff to feel that. Now I can pull the lever again and fight again, but after fighting the first time, I realized I only get a normal reward for what is a more difficult room. So it feels like a bad proposition, and I left the mechanic alone. After playing for my first hour or so, I stopped using the challenge rooms altogether because the risk versus reward didn't seem to be there. Now there might be more to that room, but I was unable to figure it out because there was not indicators, or the game was imbalanced when it came to the challenge rooms. So after what just sounded like 3 very large criticisms for bullets per minute, you probably are thinking that I disliked this game. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, even though Pepsi was only the superior cola in those sample tastes, it was still a good soda all the way through. And just like Pepsi, bullets per minute is a good game even outside that first hour. Yes, it does have design issues within it, but those mostly are just an update away from being fixed. This game does have an opportunity to be greater than what it is right now, but even as it is in its current form, this is a really fun game. I'm walking away from bullets per minute with a smile on my face and knowing that I had a lot of fun with this game. But I'm also walking away knowing that this game has an opportunity to be a much better game than it is today. So my little disclaimer on who is this game for and is it worth buying? This game is most certainly not for a casual gamer. If you don't find that you are skilled in any way at first-person shooters, you should just avoid this game because it's not going to be for you. If you're the type of gamer that likes Borderlands as a first-person shooter because you're able to level up and do better as you go through the game, again, this game's not for you. If you enjoy a challenge, don't mind playing the same thing over and over again, happen to like heavy metal, happen to like rhythm games, happen to like roguelike games, any of those buckets, you really, really need to do yourself a favor and buy this game. Bullets per minute gets 85 pixels out of 100. But I do want to add a little disclaimer here that in the event that they fix those balancing and indication elements of the game, this one may deserve something well into the 90s. It is a great game that just gets held back by a few flaws. Make sure to like this video if you liked this video, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you, go look at my other videos, and if you like those, consider subscribing. Until next time, this has been Pixel.